Good evening and welcome back. We are moving on to item number H6 and H7. H6 is a public hearing to consider adoption of the West Friendly Neighborhood Conservation Overlay, and H7, a public hearing to consider West Friendly Overlay zoning map amendment. We do have a total of 15 minutes for speakers. There will be a staff presentation. Russ?
There we go. Okay. Thank you. So good evening, Mayor and City Council members. Thank you very much. My name is Russ Clegg. I'm the manager of the Long Range Planning Division in the Planning Department. Tonight, we are asking City Council to hold a public hearing and consider the adoption of a neighborhood conservation overlay for a portion of West Friendly Avenue. Council can adopt the overlay with changes to either the map or the standards. The Planning and Zoning Commission held a public hearing on September 16th and voted in favor of the recommendation supporting adoption with a 5-4 vote. First, a brief overview before my presentation. I'll point out a few highlights. First, this process was initiated and driven by residents and property owners. Staff provided technical support, but the residents began the process, secured signatures on petitions, and discussed the overlay with other property owners. This overlay makes adjustments to specific dimensional standards of the zoning code based on what exists currently in the area. It does not stop development or rezoning, but helps make new zoning or new development compatible with what is there. Our comprehensive plan speaks about the importance of infill, but also about compatible development. And there will be 5 standards in the proposal that I will go over briefly in a moment. This is the area proposed for the NCO. It includes properties that face Friendly Avenue from West Ridge Road to Holden Road. There are some gaps in the properties that are included. This is for 2 reasons. There are some city-owned properties, such as parks and fire stations, and some properties face cul-de-sacs and don't face Friendly Avenue, so they were not included in the overlay. The residents along Friendly Avenue initiated conversations with city staff and turned in the necessary application and kept the process moving forward throughout the process. The neighborhood does the work of getting petitions signed and explaining the concepts of the NCO as they do so. Residents were responsible for getting the signatures on the petitions. To start the process, there's a requirement for a petition with signatures from property owners of 25% of the properties in the area. And a second petition is required to move into the public hearing process. That requires signatures from owners of at least 50% of the properties along the corridor. During the process, we held 2 large public meetings. The first was in January. We talked about what neighborhood conservation overlays are. We discussed the character-defining elements of that section of Friendly Avenue. Residents told us that they appreciated the large front yards, the way the houses were situated on the lots, and particularly the trees that line the avenue as you move either on the road or on the sidewalks. We also got consensus on moving forward with the process. We held a second meeting in April. We determined which elements to include and some of the specifics for those elements. I will point out that the notifications for the meetings and the petitions also were only included with the people that were directly impacted and included in the overlay. The notifications that we do for the public hearings, like this one, go to a much wider audience because it includes a 750-foot buffer around that. So a neighborhood conservation overlay is put in place to help maintain some consistency in an area as new development occurs. The overlay tailors dimensional standards based on the pattern of existing neighborhood development. In some cases, the way neighborhoods were built does not match the current zoning. It is intended to help new development be more compatible with the existing neighborhood. It does not prevent someone from asking to rezone their property. The elements in the NCO would stay consistent if the base zoning changed. It does not regulate maintenance or demolitions, and if new building does occur, there's no extra process or approvals required due to a neighborhood conservation overlay. The current zoning in this portion of Friendly Avenue is R3. That allows detached single-family dwelling units up to 3 per acre. It does allow some other uses, including churches and schools. And the elements that are included in this NCO include front and side setbacks, height, orientation, and tree conservation. The front setback for R3 zoning is 25 feet. The average along this portion of Friendly Avenue is over 90 feet. The setbacks are a little larger as you move west along the road, but generally there's a smooth and consistent line from one house to the next. In cases of new construction, the proposed NCO uses the average of the two adjacent properties to determine the front setback for the new construction. So it takes that context into consideration. Side setbacks for R3 is 10 feet. The average in this area is over 20 feet. The NCO proposes to have a minimum side setback for 20 feet if the lots are 90 feet wide or larger. Most of the lots in this area are wider than required. And for lots narrower than 90 feet, the side setback will stay at 10 feet. The maximum height allowed in R3 zoning is 50 feet. About 90% of the homes in the proposed overlay are 1 story in height. The proposed ordinance has a maximum height of 40 feet. There is an allowance for accessory structures to be up to 12 feet taller than the principal structure to allow for additions to garages if that's desired. Orientation is included. The main facade of the principal structure will face Friendly Avenue. If there's a subdivision of lots, the lots that face Friendly Avenue will be included in the NCO, and those houses would need to face the avenue. And finally, tree conservation. And again, along with the other elements, this only applies if there's new construction. In that case, the first 50 feet of the front yard is determined to be an area where 75% of the existing trees have to be preserved. If that cannot be met, then additional trees can be removed, but they do need to be replanted back to that 75% number. And doing an analysis of the neighborhood, we saw that most of the trees were in the front half of the yard, so they tailored the conservation area based on that. So at this point, I'd like to answer any questions y'all may have.
Any questions for Russ? Okay, we do have a number of speakers signed up. Jenny Kaiser, Art Close, Nikki Kohut, Andrew Aronson, Andrew LaRue, and John Drinkard. You have a total of 15 minutes. You can come up in any order that you choose. If you would give us your address also, that would be helpful.
Good evening, Mayor Vaughn and council members. My name is Nikki Kohut, and I live at 3921 West Friendly Avenue. I am a lifelong Greensboro resident, and I live within the NCO district. I'm here this evening to express my support of the West Friendly Avenue Neighborhood Conservation Overlay. The NCO came together as a request by the neighborhood to preserve the unique elements of the West Friendly Avenue neighborhood, which has drawn families and visitors alike to Greensboro for over half a century. This area has long been established as a center point of multiple historic Greensboro neighborhoods converging. These neighborhoods include Starmount Forest, Hamilton Lakes, and Hamilton Forest. Each home within the NCO has its own unique charm, contributing to the neighborhood's character. As such, we've had great interest and support from the neighbors within the NCO to see that the area remains close to its current form, respective to new development. Over the last year, we began the process of submitting a petition to the city for the creation of the NCO. We held several public meetings from January through April to get feedback from the neighborhood. I personally worked with the city planning department as well as a team of neighbors and homeowners over the last 15 months to listen to concerns with respect to the NCO. In those conversations, we learned that what is cherished are the large residential lots with deep setbacks, street-facing homes, walking trails, large canopy trees along the roadside, and a tree-planted median, all which uniquely define the area within the NCO. In total, we had over 80% of property owners sign in favor of the draft that was proposed. The Greensboro 2040 plan outlines the goal of safeguarding the environment, protecting trees and historic buildings and places from potential impacts of development and redevelopment. Through the details of tree preservation, street-facing homes, building height maximums, and setbacks, the protections set forth in the NCO will help shape future development within the neighborhood, serve to protect natural resources, give the neighborhood a sense of place, character, landscape, and wisely facilitate quality residential infill design. Because the neighborhood is surrounded by activity centers to the east and west of the NCO will serve as a much-needed buffer in order to protect the integrity of the neighborhood. Buffers help to preserve streetscapes, maintain view sheds, and prevent incompatible development from encroaching on and harming established neighborhoods within larger communities. This NCO is not just about the setbacks, trees, or even rezoning. It's about preserving a treasured Greensboro neighborhood. City Council has not just an opportunity, but a duty to safeguard the legacy and beauty of this beloved neighborhood for both present and future generations. I'm asking the Commission for your vote to approve the West Friendly Avenue Neighborhood Conservation Overlay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Andrew LaRue. I live at 708 Kemp Road West in Greensboro, which was in the 750-foot buffer. My wife and I also own property at 4016 West Friendly Avenue, which is undeveloped right now, but within the bounds of the NCO. I'm speaking in support of adopting this NCO and would like your support in it as well. This effort has really brought our neighborhood together over this long process that we've been through. I've met many neighbors that I hadn't met before, kind of a little further away from us. And there's been a really good participation through all the neighborhood meetings that we've had. So we have had signs in the yards. The signs have advertised this NCO. They've advertised the meetings that we've been having, the planning board meetings that we've been to. All those dates have been on our signs. Emails, phone trees. I think that's why we were able to gain such a high percentage of support from other residents that live along this section of West Friendly Avenue. The city planning department was also a great help for us during the meetings, helping us guide and develop this NCO, help write drafts, bring it back to the residential neighborhoods for comments, which we provided, and we're able to update it. So we were able to craft it so it just has the minimum standards that we wanted in the NCO. We've lived in Greensboro for 17 years and in our current house for 8 years. When the property at 4016 came up for sale, we jumped at the opportunity because it's such a great neighborhood. We wanted to maintain ownership of those properties with local residents. We wanted to keep all the trees that are on that property and then have the option in the future, right? So if we wanted to downsize and put a house there, but we're also raising our kids in the neighborhood. So we will have that property for future generations for our kids if they're still in Greensboro, so they can enjoy the neighborhood, raise their family the way that we've raised them there as well. I think the strength of this NCO comes from all of the independent individuals that came together and formed this great majority for it. So having all those different voices in it has really strengthened it. I really think that want this to be a success story for residents getting involved with city processes, with the planning department, and coming together on a good solution that's going to help preserve our neighborhood for the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your children will stay here in Greensboro.
Yep.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. First of all, my name is John Drinkard. My wife and I live at 4020 West Friendly Avenue. We've lived there since 1997. We've lived in the community for 40 years and raised our family there. Our home is in the boundaries of the NCO. I want to, I guess, put first of all in your mind 3 things I want to hit upon. Number one is that we had overwhelming support by the neighbors who are in the NCO neighborhood for this amendment. We went through a very lengthy process working with the team of the city of Greensboro and as well as neighbors to get cohesion on this. Number 2, I want to emphasize that this is about creating a pathway forward for new development in our neighborhood. We know that that is going to happen, and how can we, based upon what our past experience, make this an easier process? And so the third element is, if we can make it an easier process for us, we can make it an easier process for you. So just a very quick historical perspective about how the NCO came about. First of all, I'm an architect. I work with developers. I'm also a resident, so I'm very accustomed to how is a development done that can benefit the neighborhood versus when it ignores the neighborhood and turns us back upon the context of the surrounding area. I personally experienced that this past year as we were dealing with rezoning in our neighborhood. Well, coming out of the process, although we won that battle, we wanted to find a way, how can we make this easier for ourselves and for developers? Can we find a guideline to help them know how, if they're coming into our neighborhood, what are the guidelines that would be helpful for them for planning that process? I'll say that that's how we came, amazingly enough, City of Greensboro had that answer. It's called the NCO. And it helps, as Russ did a great job explaining, it helps fill in those gaps, such that if we can provide that overlay, and Zach, I appreciate your comments regarding that, but we can provide that level of overlay to give that extra addition guidance as they're looking at and developing a piece of property in their neighborhood, so that we feel comfortable that they're going to have those as guidelines to go by. So last few points, I just want to offer some clarifications regarding this. I guess, number one, this NCO is not about stopping new development. It is about promoting development in our neighborhood to help support what you're doing with the 2040 plan. The second thing I'd like to say is that we're not here to limit rights of the homeowners. This is not an HOA. We're not requiring homeowners to ask permission to do anything. It's not preventing them from redeveloping their property or rezoning their property. But it gives a guideline for any new construction that is to be done in this area. How can it help fit the context environment and protect this corridor for as you go approaching the Greensboro from the west? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mayor Vaughn and City Council members, my name is Jenny Kaiser, and I live at 201 Erskine Drive West. And I'm here in support of my neighbors that live on West Friendly. I'm vertically challenged, so excuse us just for a second. Short people rule. Yay! I'm here in support of my neighbors on West Friendly, and I am asking for your support as well. When I am tasked with a question that has different perspectives, I ask, what do we want? So I ask all of us right now, what do we want? Well, I cannot answer for you. I will attempt to answer for our neighbors on West Friendly. They want a neighborhood that will keep its character and appeal as investors purchase land for redevelopment, hence the request for the NCO. One of our biggest questions I've heard is, who initiated the NCO? There has been this assumption that the NCO is a plan devised from people not impacted by the overlay. The genesis of the NCO started after hearing about the Westridge NCO during the rezoning of the Saba property last summer. The idea was quickly picked up by our West Friendly homeowners. It was intentional that the people championing the adoption be impacted by the adoption. In addition, the only people that had a vote on what the NCO covered were residents owning property on West Friendly. Again, this was intentional, as those of us not living on the boulevard would not be impacted by the changes. The petitioners understand that the NCO is not a binding contract. The NCO is meant to be used as a tool for investors to see how they can make their new sections blend in with the established ones. These guidelines also help us ensure gentle density increase rather than rapid ones. The neighborhood would hope that the NCO would be considered when new construction is being approved. All homes under the NCO are deemed compliant at the time of adoption by you. Here are some of the scenarios to kind of better illustrate the impact of the NCO on the neighborhood. For resale, the NCO and the compliancy of that home follows the home and not the homeowner. The renovations to the interior and exterior of the home are not included as long as the footprint of the home does not change. Additions would be covered under the NCO, but we would hope that the neighbors would be able to understand the boundaries and respect them. Catastrophic incident. This came up. What happens if there's a fire or a tree falls on the house? What happens? You're going to be rebuilding. A new home can be rebuilt on the existing footprint and still be considered compliant. The NCO does not require that a home be rebuilt on the exact footprint, but it does allow it. If you would like to demolish and rebuild or build a cul-de-sac or build a neighborhood, that is when the NCO really comes into action. And it's important to note that when a subdivision is built, it's only the homes facing West Friendly that are included in the NCO. Just like to point out that per the city's checking, we had more than 70% of homeowners on West Friendly sign in to this NCO and ask for it to be approved. So with the remaining 2 minutes, if you guys have any questions, we'd happily answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers for the last minute and 56 seconds? Okay, well then is there a motion to close the public hearing?
Move to close the public hearing.
Okay, it was moved by Mrs. Hightower, seconded by Mrs. Thurm. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And that
Aye.
passes unanimously. Motion or comments? Well, Mrs. Yeah.
We've had council work sessions about it, and so we know a lot about it. And thank the staff for that. But we have talked to people, and it's not like we're not very familiar with it.
So Mrs. Hoffman, I think, has a motion, and then I do as well.
And I'll make a couple of comments. I think this is an example of a neighborhood that came together quite strongly to attempt to offer some protection for the things that they felt were important about their neighborhood. It's a neighborhood that I know quite well, as a matter of fact. My husband Jack and I think, bought our house on Kemp Road West the same year as Mr. Drinkard. I believe he mentioned 1997 as well also. We lived at 707, which was the second house on Kemp Road. And then, subsequently, some years later, moved to the Friendly West Townhome community, which is just across the street from where the overlay will begin or end. So, I appreciate what has been done. I think what you've been able to do is to preserve the elements of your community that you felt strongly about. That's your protection of the tree canopy on Friendly. It's the setbacks for new construction, and the houses fronting on Friendly, so as well as the tree conservation, which you wanted to maintain for Friendly Avenue. So I think you've accomplished that with the NCO, and I give you lots of credit for all of the work that you did. I think one of our zoning commissioners said it's hard to get 80% of a group of people to ever agree on anything. So I think that you were close to 80% in terms of your representation. There's only one thing, and I don't know whether it will require a motion or not, Mayor, but
I feel a little help from Chuck.
I feel strongly that there is one property that needs to be removed from the overlay, and I've discussed it with a few people, and that's the property at West Friendly and Holden, 3701. That's been a rental property for 25-plus years. My belief is that it's never, it's not ever going to be a newly constructed single-family dwelling. So I think it has other development opportunity because the length of it really runs back along Holden. So I don't know how we do this, but I would like consideration.
I think you should make a motion with that adjustment.
Okay.
Move it minus that property, and then I
All right.
have a...
Then, there may be some other comments, but I'd like to make the motion that we approve the NCO for West Friendly with the change or addition that we exempt 3701 West Friendly.
Is there a second on that?
I'll second.
Mayor Pro Tem gets precedence. So I would also like to make a friendly amendment, but let me explain it. I'm very familiar with this area. My parents lived on Seven Oaks, one house in. My son lives 2 houses in Starmount, and I live on Westridge. As you know, Westridge is the only other street in Greensboro right now with the NCO. I think it shows you that it's something that takes a lot of time and commitment for it to happen, or a whole bunch of neighborhoods would at this point. So I know that a lot of work went into this, and so I will support it. The question I have is that right now, if somebody wanted to have an adjustment done, whether it's to change a setback or whatever, they would appear in front of the Board of Adjustments. I would prefer that it come back to City Council. This was a very deliberate rezoning to your own properties, and I think City Councils understand the significance of that. I don't feel that the Board of Adjustments does. And all the work that goes into putting together an NCO. So I would like to change it, and I don't know if I have pushback from legal, but I would like to change it where instead of going to the Board of Adjustments, it comes back to City Council.
Did you make a motion to that effect?
That's what I'm making, yes. And
She made
I thought there was a motion on the floor.
She made a friendly amendment.
The friendly amendment.
To the motion. And I second both of them. She made the friendly amendment, then Nancy got it.
I mean, one really has nothing to do with the other. I don't think you can change the ordinance, this way.
I think, though, that while it may not change the ordinance, it does address the appeal process, and I think that's something that we need to do because we see that there is a very contentious one going on along Westridge right now, or the potential of a Board of Adjustments hearing along Westridge. And I think that this is something very different. It's not a standard rezoning. This is something that the neighborhood has imposed upon themselves, and that is something that's different, and I think it should come back to us.
Yeah, the statutory structure what the legislature has imposed is that you appeal from that Board of Adjustments to the Superior Court.
No, but I'm saying don't send it to the Board of Adjustments, send it back to the City Council. So that the
jurisdiction of the Board of Adjustments has already been established by council.
But, Chuck, I think what's being said is if we approve the NCO here, and then it was someone wanted to come back in the NCO based on what they wanted to make a change, then that particular appeal will come here.
An NCO is
Not
a classic,
to a Board of
legislative action by council. It has broad application. It's a sort of a rule that council is adopting as a political matter.
I think when that was adopted, I don't know that there were any NCOs and that was even thought of.
All I'm saying is that when you do that, that's what it is. It's a legislative act. It's the kind of thing you guys do all the time.
So can't we do a legislative act saying it comes back to council?
That would be changing the jurisdiction of the Board of Adjustments, and their role is to do quasi-judicial transactions. So instead of having the sort of community oversight and role that you all play generally, it's not supposed to be about that. It's only supposed to be
See, I
on
think
the
that's where the
evidence
problem
presented.
is. I think that's the problem. If somebody was going to come and wanted an adjustment in a setback or the frontage, that there has been a lot of community involvement, and you lose that by sending it back to the Board of Adjustments. And if somebody is able to appeal the setbacks then that kind of does away with the whole NCO, because that is really the biggest part of what they're.
Exceptions to general rules happen all the time. It's a general rule, and you're making an exception to it. But you have to do it based on the narrow focus, and you guys have a broad focus. So,
Well, you're the lawyer. I disagree. I think this is a different. I think this is a different standard. It's an NCO. It's not a regular rezoning where somebody needs an adjustment in their setback or their frontage or whatever. This is something that has been imposed upon by the neighborhood that 80% have signed on to, and if they can now just go to the Board of Adjustments and ask for an exception, I think it really does away with the strength of this action.
could we do some research on that?
I can't, what?
Could we do some research on that? And get back to you about it before an action's taken?
Well, we have,
Madam Mayor?
Tammy?
I'd like to suggest that we look at this issue more globally, because if we make this adjustment, then we need to also go ahead and make the adjustment for Westridge.
And I think Westridge would be fine with that.
And so I'm thinking that if we need to adjust an ordinance or something like that, if we have the ability to do that,
Public hearing.
that we do that as a separate agenda item and make that change globally.
Well, and I think that my idea is that this is globally because it's not a standard rezoning. It's not a regular rezoning. It's not going to impact everybody in the city. It would impact this street. If we wanted to impact Westridge as well, that would be great. So if we want to go ahead and pass it and then put the appeal process on an additional agenda item at a later date, like in November, I think that's fine.
I think that's what I was suggesting.
I think actually is the change in an ordinance, and it needs to have a public hearing, just the amendment part of it. And I really need to do a little more deeper research on it before I can fully advise.
Okay, I would like a report back, and if we can do it in November or December, that would be fine.
No problem.
But I do think that this is an unusual situation, and that it should be given the deliberation that it deserves. And I think it's best handled at the council level. So I will withdraw my friendly amendment to a later date.
Okay, so we have, I've made the motion to.
I just have one
Well, there
quick.
might be some
I'm
more
sorry.
comments.
I just had one quick question. Now that the mayor's withdrew her amendment, but if we vote on this and it passes, that means we've passed it according to the current legislation. How are we going to go back and appeal it? We're going to have to go back through.
The appeal process on a variance application has nothing to do with the adoption of the NCO. Just like the Westridge one, I mean, it's a separate ordinance, and you can amend that after a public hearing at any council meeting. I would just like to have a chance to do a little research and make sure that you're advised, at which point you can certainly make whatever choices you want to make.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So
Are there
I'm sorry.
any other comments?
Any other questions? No, go ahead.
Oh, I thought you were through. No?
If there are other questions.
Mary Kay, Zach.
I just wanted to thank the community and those who've been so interested in this. I could go through everything we've already talked about or was presented there, but, you know, we have gotten all of your emails. Many of you, we've gotten your phone calls, but with our schedules, sometimes we can't return everything. So I wanted to make that perfectly clear that
Thank you.
we are listening, and we do hear you. You know, I certainly appreciate, you know, coming with the PowerPoint. All of the comments were very concise. It wasn't like other things have been in the past sometimes. But, you know, we really do appreciate it, and don't want you to think that we haven't noted what you've sent to us and what you've left on voicemails, because it, you know, when you get more than like 50 a day, it's sometimes a little hard to return all the calls. We do try, but we just wanted to thank you for that. So, yes, I'm in support of this as well. Thank you.
So, Zach, Tammy, Nancy, anyone else? Okay, Zach?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, Kirkwood, which I've represented for 10 years, tried to do an NCO, and it turned out to be a real cluster, and it didn't go through, which was an interesting process. And Mike Kirkman and I had some discussion on that last week when we discussed this. One of the things that I heard was to make it easier for the neighborhood and for the city. I will tell you, one of my concerns with NCOs is you get a false sense of security. And meaning, and I see head shaking. You don't have to listen to me. I've just served up here for 20 years. You get a false sense of security where you think, well, the NCO is going to cover it. I'm protected, so I don't need to be involved or worry about it, which is one of the downfalls on the Kirkwood proposed NCO. Much like you saw earlier, you know, things that may be on the books are not set in stone and can be changed. And it will be interesting to see if it goes to the Board of Adjustments or if it comes to us. The other key point is one of the best things that we have in our communities are neighbors that actually do know each other and do work together. And having an NCO shouldn't stop that. If there's a problem, you should come together. And the fact that you had a rezoning case that y'all did, as was mentioned earlier, successfully beat, shows you that you've had a voice. You don't need an overlay to have a voice. You, to somebody's point, have been heard. You will continue to be heard, whether an NCO happens or not. One of my concerns is this is in perpetuity. So Friendly Avenue is a major road. I remember when we were reconstructing it and the calls and emails we got when the construction was happening, and how dare we put a median in the middle of Friendly and the trees and all the stuff that we went through then. And so it is, we tried to beautify a road, and the city got blamed for that. But it is a major road. And, you know, looking at the map, folks, there's not going to be a whole lot of change. I mean, the only thing that could change looking at the houses is somebody would have to buy a lot of houses. You know, I do have questions, Russ, relating to cul-de-sacs. So I do see a couple of areas. And I wrote down, would Roundtree Court or Bruton Court, would, under the NCO, would Bruton Court have been able to be developed?
Bruton Court is one of the properties that's excluded. Is that correct? I believe.
You tell me. This is your plan. It is excluded.
So I would say
the
that
question is, if somebody were to come in and say, hypothetically, come in off of Greenwood, buy the property located hypothetically at 803 Greenwood, buy the property that's currently in a trust, at 3804 West Friendly. So you come off of Greenwood and you build a cul-de-sac, okay? So that's 2-acre lot. You could have probably a few houses in there. That would be a cul-de-sac that dead ends, very similar to Bruton Court. Would that be affected? That property is in the NCO, but the houses will not face Friendly. Does the NCO come into play?
So the way that would work, if there's a subdivision of property that's currently in the NCO, then the parcels that were remaining facing Friendly Avenue would be part of the NCO. So those houses would need to face Friendly Avenue. So in that instance, those houses would face Friendly Avenue and be part of that NCO, and the other houses would not. They would be no
So
longer.
in this case, should future development, they would have to come to the Board of Adjustments, or as the mayor requested, come back to City Council to do a cul-de-sac where houses would not face Friendly Avenue.
If they wanted to, whatever subdivision, and if there was a need to vary from the NCO, just like any other part of the zoning code, they would need to go to the Board of Adjustment to seek some variance to that, yes.
So this would go with that, even though the houses are not going to face Friendly, the proposed development.
Correct. Well, I mean, assuming should be some way to build it so the houses did face Friendly, but if that was not a possibility, they would need to go to the Board of Adjustment for variance, yes.
On the rebuild, should a disaster occur, which obviously we saw in western North Carolina, to rebuild, if I wanted to rebuild my house closer to Friendly, would that be okay? Or would I have to go through Board of Adjustments to rebuild my house?
That would, if the NCO were established, that would really depend on where your neighbor's house is at. If they sit in front of you, yes, you would be able to move forward because the new front setback would be based on the average of the two next to you. If you were a little bit ahead of those, you would have to build back in your existing footprint or move back a little bit. So it wouldn't require you to build back in your exact footprint, but the new setback would really depend on where the two built properties were
So
next.
some of these houses are 70 years old, right? Built around 1950. And thought processes on housing were different back then, correct? And so if I had something that I wanted to have more of a backyard for more privacy, maybe, I've got 3 kids, have a bigger backyard, I would have to pay how much to reapply to get permission to build the house that I want?
If you wanted to build ahead of the front setback to increase your backyard, depending on, the circumstances, obviously, you might need to go get a variance, yes, if you wanted to be.
And how much is that?
That I don't know.
I think it's $300, Zach.
So rezonings are about $1,200.
Yeah, I think the Board of Adjustment cost is.
Board of Adjustment fees are $400.
Is it 400?
So it's 400, but if the mayor, if it comes back to City Council, is there a fee?
That, we don't know that. That's a whole different kettle of fish, so. That's a whole conversation we'll have to get a report on later from the attorney's office, so.
I mean, $400 if you're building a house on this road is a rounding error for most, but it just shows the impediment that we're creating on this. The additions. So if I want to build I personally want to build a fireplace in my backyard and a deck. If I do that, am I going to have to apply to go to the Board of Adjustments to build an addition on the back of my house and pay the fee?
No, sir, this does not change the existing back setback, so assuming you can build within that, you would not need a variance on that, for anything in the back.
If I want to build a master suite or something, or a garage, what's an addition?
Well, anything that would require a permit, basically it's not any different than the way we treat setbacks now. They just kind of adjust what that setback is. So if you were to go do a significant addition to your house or build a new house, you submit plans to the city and we review that against the prevailing setbacks for that zoning
So anything I
zoning
have to get a
designation.
permit for, I have to come back to the Board of Adjustments.
No.
Sir. Not unless, if it fits within those
Well,
parameters,
that's
you
what
do
you
not.
just said. Hold on.
So if you would not need to get a variance unless whatever you were proposing to do went farther than than the setback, just as you do currently with the land development ordinance. So, presuming that we're building within what the setbacks were, you would not need to get a variance.
Okay, but the NCO widens the setback, doubles it, right?
For lots 90 feet wide and larger, yes.
Yeah. You know, I struggle with this because I wish NCOs, quite frankly, neighborhood conservation overlays, had a renewal process, because this neighborhood's going to change, the ownership's going to change, and the new owners might not agree with what you want in 20 years. And this is something that's done forever, right? What we do today could last 150 years, even though our city might change.
Unless the ordinance is changed in the future, that is correct.
I will say that, in my opinion, having served up here from zoning commission and city council, I've rarely seen a neighborhood not win. Not win. If a neighborhood in Westridge started the neighborhood congress on that redevelopment 20 years ago, Westridge won, regardless of a neighborhood conservation overlay. They won. Westridge is the epitome of neighborhood and property owners coming together to fight against what would be deemed a bad development. You know, and there's been others, you know, I've had controversial cases in College Hill, where we voted on an old metal works factory to turn into student housing. And I remember it was the only precinct I lost in like 3 elections. But it was the right decision, and council went with it, and we have more student housing there, and quite frankly, it looks a hell of a lot better than the metal sheet plant that was there. So I've been through this for 20 years.
That precinct is in District 4 now.
Yeah, and it's good, and it adds a hell of a lot of money to the tax base. Looking at this street, knowing it as well as I do, it's going to take a lot for anything to happen. Just looking at, knowing the houses, this all came about because of really one rezoning that combined 3 lots, and now we're in a case where that doesn't even come into play on this. I think it'll pass, but this is not the end. It's not the end. You don't give up. I mean, you got to pay attention. A neighborhood conservation overlay, again, I think builds impediment to development, impediment to mixed use. We basically beg folks to have mixed use, and now we're going to make it harder to have, you know, townhomes or other things that are more friendly to new buyers and mature buyers. As Nancy said, she lived on Folkestone for a number of years, and this is going to create further impediments. And I've got a problem with that, and to sit here and vote on something that will last in perpetuity when we don't know what's going to be in perpetuity. So I'm not really for these. I stood strong on Kirkwood, and quite frankly, I was involved in a development that the Kirkwood neighborhood spends a lot of time at, lives at. It was a mixed-use development called Kirkwood Place, and is a very successful thing that we were able to get done, and the neighborhood loves it. So I think you're going to miss out on some opportunities, but again, just you've had a voice all along. You want it. don't let a neighborhood conservation overlay think that you're going to be done. I can't support it for some of those reasons.
Tammy?
Yeah, I feel almost the exact opposite of Zach on this. And for me, this kind of empowers not only the neighborhood, but I think it empowers developers. We had a developer that spent a lot of time and money, and we see it all the time. Developers come in, they make plans, they go through the zoning, and for one reason or another, and frequently it's because of neighborhood opposition. We just had one today. Gets voted down. And I think this gives an opportunity to a developer to look at properties that they may want to develop and go, okay, how can I do this and not go through much of the hell that our developers go through, rightly so, but, and I shouldn't call it hell, but rightly so, to work in conjunction with the neighbors, and they're backpedaling and redoing. This gives them an idea up front. This is what we want. This is what the neighborhood wants to see. It saves the developer a lot of time and money in going through, battles in the future. I commend this group of neighbors, this neighborhood. I think they've done an admirable job of identifying a problem and saying, okay, how do we make sure we don't have to go through this again? And how do we use the system? If there are things we don't like about the NCO, if we want to see a 25-year renewal or something like that, then we can go through and take a look at the NCO ordinance. But at this point, with this NCO before us, I think it's a great thing, and I look forward to voting in favor of it.
Nancy, then Hugh. Oh, nothing? Okay, sorry.
You have comments?
Hugh?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess off the top, I'll say that I will not be supporting this NCO, and let me explain why. I look at the 2040 plan, the one that we talked about a little bit earlier. I look at what it calls for. It calls for a lot of infill. It calls for the mixed use. It calls for all the differences that will help to make us a little more unique going into the future. And I look at the tenets of the NCO, and I look at that inflection point. That is when there are changes. I think, was it the demolitions or the reconstructions or the additions? And then I overlay that with, the home ages, and then you have the owners may or may not change over time. And the idea of what that housing or the housing in that community or in Greensboro as a whole can change from owner to owner from time to time. And it just seems to me as if the overlay, as well as it has been constructed by this community coming together and engaging and all those good things, I feel that it does and can add some obstacles or hurdles or impediments to the future owners, the future growth, the future ideas. I would rather that not happen. Again, appreciating all that the community has done in coming together. I'm still looking at 2040, mixed use, infill, future growth in housing in our communities, and I think that this NCO may not get us there. So I will not be in support.
Dr. Wells?
I also will not support. And my reason is because it seems to be the opposite of change. The city's growing, the city's changing, and I look at the neighbors, and I applaud the neighbors because I'm a neighborhood person, and to get folk together around the cause is remarkable, and you've done an excellent job. But you're saying that you want West Friendly Avenue to look the same and be the same for 100 years. We'll be gone. If young people be coming, they want to change. If they want to change the looks of things, then they should be able to do it. I just think that to say, I want this to be the same, I want the trees, the houses, everything to be the same, when we really won't even be here to see some of them. So I'm just thinking about the way I think about where we are in time. And we've all been given a certain time to be here on earth and to do the things that we were created to do. And then we go off to sing. It's just like a play. We all just play our scene, our act, and we're gone. But the next players have to come, the next actors. And we don't want them to have to try to play the same role we did, because they're different actors, it's different scene, different times. I think it's against change, and I'm about change. I want to see Greensboro grow. I want to see Greensboro change, and I don't think we should tie the hands of the next generation with this kind of ordinance. So,
Mrs. Thurm?
Yes, just in response to Mr. Holson and Dr. Wells' comments, you know, we offer the neighborhood conservation overlay. We have an ordinance. We have it out there. We offered it. We have Westridge neighbors who took advantage of it and created one. How do we justify saying Westridge can have one, but Friendly can't? How do you justify that area? We've got neighborhoods all over Greensboro that, because they don't have an NCO, are now fighting for their lives and fighting to be restored. And we support that. We want to get them back to the glory of the neighborhoods they once were, or even better. But that's only some neighborhoods. You know, I kind of feel like if we're not going to have support NCOs when neighbors do the work and come up with what I think are reasonable expectations, then why do we have NCOs? And how do we justify saying you can have one, but you can't? That just makes no sense to me, and I think we're penalizing people for taking advantage of a program the city offers.
Thank you. So, Mrs. Hightower?
Thank you very much. So I hear both sides, and I've been sitting here kind of quiet. Doesn't necessarily mean that because if you vote this one down, you still can't do others, correct? Because what I don't want to do is see other neighborhoods penalized either. It's kind of what Tammy's speaking to, around making sure they have the opportunity to protect their neighborhoods, you know, by having an overlay. And maybe many neighborhoods don't have an overlay because they don't understand it, because it took me a while to understand it too. So it's not something simple, when you talk about rezonings, people get. But when you talk about overlay, what are you overlaying? Where are you overlaying? What type of overlay is it? And I've heard people talk about a tree conservation overlay even. And so, you know, my concern would be if nobody else, other neighborhoods couldn't do it. But then I think, on the other hand, and I'm going to be like some of my colleagues, I'm confused tonight, I'm conflicted. You know, so I want neighborhoods to have those opportunities to protect themselves as well. And if an overlay does some of that, then I think then it's certainly a tool that they should be able to use when they fight for their neighborhoods, just like they do when it's rezonings and they don't want to live in HI places. So I just want to make sure that we're not taking something off the table that is still will be able to be utilized.
You know, what I would say to that, Mrs. Hightower, is that, you know, this neighborhood has been together for over a year, 14, 15 months, and that if this doesn't pass, why would another neighborhood think that their efforts of 16 months to 2 years, why would they think, well, let's try it and see if it passes, when this neighborhood has been so together and worked so hard and they get turned down? I think it would make other neighborhoods less likely to try it.
As I said, Kirkwood did for a number of years, and they came in front of us how many times, Mike?
Just the one public hearing. It went to the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. I don't remember. It's a year and a half, I think, total, maybe.
To Councilwoman Thurm's point about how can we do this, I reserve the right to have my own opinion. I mean, and I would hope that we all can have our opinions, and while we might not agree all the time, that I said my opinion in an eloquent way to, you know, thank everybody and to understand that they have a voice no matter what gets passed. But, you know, how dare I do something like this when I spoke against the Kirkwood overlay on a district that I represented. And that was a district that I had a house in. It was a district that I had a house right beside. And so, you know, working with my neighbors, I still voted against it. And so I have no problem speaking my mind and feeling extremely comfortable with my opinion for me on this topic. And for anybody to question how I can make that decision, I thought I laid it out very nicely, very succinctly, and I feel absolutely comfortable with my thought process on this item.
And Madam Mayor, I would say the very same thing, that I don't believe there's any one member of council who sits here who is a monolith. Just because we make one zoning decision, R5, R7, whatever it is, that we have to keep either approving or denying those. Thank you.
Mrs. Hoffman?
Sorry. I don't think that this NCO is setting in stone what Friendly Avenue is going to look like for the next century. You know, Friendly Avenue is going to change in the next 5 years and 10 years and for the next few decades. Home ownership is going to change within these blocks of Friendly Avenue, and although the NCO is in place, depending upon what they want to do and feel that they need to do in terms of their property, they are going to go currently to the Board of Adjustment. You know, I'm not thinking about the fact that when we're voting for this tonight, we're setting in stone what Friendly Avenue is going to look like for the next 100 years, because we aren't. That's going to change. And again, I think the mayor made this point too, or Mary Kay perhaps. You know, it just means that as a neighborhood, you have to be constantly in tune with what's happening in your neighborhood and what might be being suggested in terms of zoning or whatever. So I'm reasonably certain that in this case that you will.
Did you want to say something, Dr. Wall?
I want to say, when we make decisions, it's based on our own thoughts, our past. There's a lot of things that cause us to make the decisions that we make. It's not that, we're in opposition to each other, because I believe it's going to pass. But I do still think that it's not the best thing for us. I really think that we're tying hands, and when I hear we want to keep things as they are, that bothers me because of my history, because of our history, to think of wanting to keep things the way they are and the way they were, because things have to change. We have to keep moving forward. And I just feel like Greensboro is on the move, and there's some things about trying to maintain that will be a hindrance to us in the future. And that's why I have this vote against it. But I love all of you. That's the reason. That's the reason.
Okay, so I think everybody's had
I have one other thing. Ms. Hoffman, I just wanted to make sure I got the house right, the one you're wanting to pull out. I just want to make sure I got it right, the one you...
It's the property at the corner of West Friendly and Holden.
It's right at the very beginning of
It's
the
right at the
overlay.
beginning.
Okay.
If you look at
Right there. Okay.
yeah,
The address is 3701.
3701.
3701. Okay. All right. That's fine. That's all I needed.
Do you need them to show you the overlay again so you can see it?
And there's really more frontage on that property on
Yeah.
Holden than there is on Friendly.
Why don't we just pull it up, Ms. Hightower, so you can actually see it. The majority of that property actually runs back along Holden as opposed to fronting on Friendly.
No, I'm sorry, it's not that one.
And let me just say, if the vote is 5-4 this evening, either way, it will have to come back for a second reading.
Yeah, it's a final vote, so we have to. Has to be a
Excuse me?
supermajority.
Affirmative.
Yeah,
It's an
five votes
if it's
against
an
it, it's
affirmative 5-4 vote, then it will come back for a second reading. Okay, so can you just point out that long lot at the very right?
This lot right here.
Yeah, so that's what we pulled out. Okay. So there is a motion by Mrs. Hoffman, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem. Keep in mind, if it's a 5-4 vote, we'll hear it again in November. Yes, please.
Councilmember Thurm.
I'm having trouble getting to the vote screen. I'm a yes.
And that passes 6-3, so that is a final decision. We do need the statement of consistency on the next item, because there are two So on item,
I think it needs for
bear
both.
with me, H7. So we need a statement of consistency for
both.
both. So, Mrs. Hoffman, could you read it just into the record
Certainly.
for H6?
The Greensboro City Council believes that its action to approve the zoning request to establish the West Friendly Avenue Neighborhood Conservation Overlay for the properties fronting along Friendly Avenue from North Holden Road to West Ridge Road. Do we need to put in the exception?
No.
Okay.
Well,
To be
yes,
con-
yes, you do, I think.
With the exception of 3701 West Friendly, to be consistent with the adopted GSO 2040 comprehensive plan and considers the action taken to be reasonable and in the public interest for the following reasons. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan's future built form map and future land use map. The proposed West Friendly Avenue overlay supports uses that fit the context of surrounding area and limits negative impacts on adjacent properties. The request is reasonable due to the size, physical conditions, and other attributes of the area. It will benefit the property owners and surrounding community, and approval is in the public interest.
All right, so let's just re-vote on that to make it correct. We could do a voice vote since we took a,
So the sufficiency statement we just read was for 7.
I know.
So
Oh,
we need one
7.
read for 6. And you're right, you could do it by
Okay,
both.
so 7 is moved also by Mrs. Hoffman and seconded by Mayor Pro Tem. So we're voting on 7 right now. Sorry about that. Mrs. Thurm?
Yes.
And again, that passes 6-3 with Councilman Holston, Matheny, and Dr. Wells voting against. For the record, Mrs., can we read the statement of consistency for,
Sure. Can I read again?
for 6? Yeah. Sorry about that.
The Greensboro City Council believes that its action to approve the zoning request to establish the West Friendly Avenue Neighborhood Conservation Overlay for the properties fronting along Friendly Avenue from North Holden Road to West Ridge Road, with the exception of 3701 West Friendly Avenue, to be consistent with the adopted GSO 2040 comprehensive plan, and considers the action taken to be reasonable and in the public interest for the following reasons. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan's future built form map and future land use map. The proposed West Friendly Avenue overlay supports uses that fit the context of surrounding area and limits negative impacts on adjacent properties. The request is reasonable due to the size, physical conditions, and other attributes of the area. It will benefit the property owners and surrounding community, and approval is in the public interest.
And that was a 6-3 vote. Thank you. Now we'll move on to item